You ever read something and it just doesn't make sense, and then you keep looking at it and it makes less sense? Yeah, that's basically this headline. As reported by Tom Bogert, it appears that the San Jose Earthquakes have decided not to exercise the contract option to keep Cristian Espinoza for the 2026 season, meaning that at the end of this year, his contract will be up and he'll become a free agent. This news is pretty hot off the press. There aren't that many comments that I've seen written online, but so far it seems like basically everyone is in agreement that this is a negative thing. And at least for me, my first reaction was just profound disappointment and disillusionment. And that goes to just thinking about like whoever's making this kind of decision is just, they're following a broken compass. There's just no other explanation. At least it seems that way if these rumors are true. If you look at the fan reactions to this, it probably just paints a whole picture of how key Espinoza is for this team and just how loved he is by the fans. I think this is the kind of player that is just so significant and seemingly irreplaceable that going over his stats just feels redundant. If you watched the last video on Josef Martínez, you remember that it presented reasons for why the Quakes might want to move on from him. That was a position as a striker that has good depth between Judd and Chicho. If you compared Martinez's goals per minutes, that ratio is pretty similar to that of Judd and Chicho. He's a player with a long record of varying injuries and maybe poses less availability due to his regular inclusion in the Venezuelan national team. And clearing up his salary space in the attack, which is something that Quakes are very good at, maybe provides some options to reinforce other positions that the Quakes are actually in need of. And by going from 3 strikers to 2 strikers, that kind of makes it a little bit of a more natural 3-4-3 to play with if we get a left wing replacement or if we just let Buda continue his development and becoming the starting left winger for the Quakes. And in that scenario, there were a lot of reasons that you could kind of, go through and be like, okay, maybe this is a sensible decision even though Josef Martínez was our highest goal scorer. I don't think that this news has any element to that at all. I cannot think of any good reasons not to keep Espinoza for another year if his contract already permits it. I don't know. Do the Quakes think that they can just replace their highest output player over the last half decade, just like over one transfer window for what, a presumably cheaper salary with the overhead of a transfer fee, or maybe a player that's younger that will somehow play better and cost less? Or do the Quakes think that there are other clubs around the league that are just stupid enough to let their best player go and that somehow we will attract that player over to the Quakes? I just don't understand. And especially because the Quakes hold all the cards in their hands. They have the club option to keep him. It's entirely their decision. And Espinoza is a player who in multiple press conferences and interviews over the years has expressed his gratitude for the club and vocalized how he and his family feel very comfortable here. Yes, Espinoza is a fierce competitor, so sure, you can argue maybe he does want to move on to a more competitive team. But if that were the case, then I don't think he would have signed his first contract with us after being on loan for a pretty short period with a very mediocre Quakes side led by Matias Almeida. And I doubt he would then re-sign another contract when the Quakes continue to be a mediocre team on field for multiple years. But sure, let's assume he had a change of heart. Even then, the Quakes still hold all the cards in their hands and they've chosen not to renew him, if these rumors are true. And as a side note, I do remember that Espinoza did post recently his Instagram story about his representative and his agent. So maybe that was some kind of hint that there's some truth to these rumors. But this still just doesn't make sense. We have no further information on this, and we'll just have to wait and see. But I think a very important piece here is Tom Bogert's statement about the Quakes presenting Espinoza with a new contract. That is very significant information. This, to me, signals intent from the Quakes to actually keep him on the team. We've seen these situations before where the player goes into free agency but then gets a new contract later in the offseason. It could very well be the case that Espinoza and the Quakes have an informal agreement to continue with these contract negotiations, but it won't be finished before the end of this free agency deadline and hence this free agency rumor. Now, why would there be contract negotiations if the Quakes have the option to just extend his contract by a year under the current agreement? Well, this could actually be a long-term play to keep him here for multiple years. Or it could just be a really stupid gamble at keeping him for another year on a lower salary. Or what is maybe most likely is that they're trying to remove the designated player status from Espinoza. So let's enter this massive speculation zone here, and maybe it's just the hopeful Quakes fan in me that's going through these. So first, imagine a scenario where the Quakes exercise the option and Espinoza does play here in 2026, but then at the end of next season, he becomes a free agent anyways. That would be the same situation, is just as bad. Maybe it makes sense to just avoid that headache now and offer him a multi-year contract while he's still 30 instead of 31. As you get older, each year, unfortunately, does matter more and more. This benefits the Quakes because under such a multi-year agreement, maybe they can renegotiate the salary to a less per year number, but this still guarantees Espinoza a larger amount of money in the long term. I don't like the idea of trying to gamble the next season on trying to lower Espinoza's salary for a single year, but if a multi-year deal does emerge from this, then whoever's making these decisions for the Quakes is honestly going to look like a genius. The other possible positive scenario has to do with Josef Martínez's departure. Martínez was making $1.45 million a year, which, if I'm understanding roster rules correctly, puts him in what's called the targeted allocation money roster spot. The roster rules in MLS are honestly very, very complicated, but roughly speaking, there's a ceiling for what most players can make. That's around, I think it was $740,000 a year. There are a handful of players that can exceed this amount. There are two types. First is the designated player, and then the second is the targeted allocation money players, or for short, DP and TAM respectively. DPs, in simple terms, are players that can make any amount of money as long as the club can actually afford them. Right now, that is Espinoza and Chicho Arango, both making about $2 million per year. TAM, on the other hand, is like a bucket of money, which for the 2026 season is $2.125 million. And that is an allowance in which you can just use that money in whatever way on however many players you want, as long as they make over the max ceiling per player and the total of those salaries doesn't exceed the TAM limit. Meaning any number of players making over about $740,000 a year whose combined salaries are less than that $2.125 million limit. With Espinoza's current salary of $1.8 million and total compensation of $2 million per year, this actually could fit perfectly within the TAM limit now that Martínez is leaving and clearing out $1.45 million of that pool. Now, what I'm not totally sure of is if there's anyone else on the roster using TAM money at the moment. My understanding of the rule is that there could be, because if you subtract that $2.25 million total limit, which was for this 2025 season, minus Josef's $1.45 million, that would leave just shy of about $800,000, which, that being over that maximum baseline salary of about $740,000, means we could have another player on this kind of a TAM deal. I'm not sure who that would be. There isn't great transparency on which players occupy which kind of contracts, unfortunately. But this means the Quakes could retain Espinoza at his current salary, or maybe even a little bit better, and negotiate a multi-year deal which keeps him for the long term and frees up that DP spot. This would be the best case scenario for me, because this, along with Hernan Lopez being on loan for the entirety of the 2026 season, means the Quakes could go out and sign two more designated players in this offseason. Two more of those no salary ceiling players, who would presumably be major contributors to this team and big names in this league. This would make so much sense if the Quakes think they're going to change ownership in the short term. And this has been confirmed that the Quakes are up for sale by current owner John Fisher. And if you listen to Bruce Arena's end of season press conference, you might remember that the way he was speaking made it sound like this new ownership was just around the horizon. So that's where we're at with this situation. It's honestly a dreadful headline with a potential for being one of the biggest roster moves of this year, for better or for worse. I am terrified of this going south, particularly Espinoza going down south to our rival California clubs. But with the information we have, we can't reach any conclusions just yet. So stay hopeful and we'll know more in the coming weeks. That's all for this video. Let me know what you think, and thanks for watching. I'll catch you in the next one.